Hi folks, welcome to the third installment of PhotoView Fridays. Not sure how long it's been since the second one and how shortly I said I would try to get to this one. I think it might be overdue, but here it is anyway. So one of the things I noticed is that when I do the well, I had this sort of intention of covering lots of different things, and then what I'm finding is, there are usually some follow-up questions I get, or even some separate postings I find on the forums here and there, or things that come in from users through tech support that are perhaps related to something I've just done. So in this case, I thought I would try and use the opportunity to kind of complete and finish off on what I had started last time with cameras and backgrounds. So to that end, let me sort of jump in here, I guess. The first thing I'll talk about is what we had talked about in one of the previous postings was how to align your model with a background, and we're looking at some of our default content, such as this. I think we were using the kitchen at the time, but here's another example of this courtyard scene where we have a visible background, and you can do a reasonable job of setting this thing up so that it looks like it's sitting in this courtyard. I say reasonable because I have some issues with this. The image that's being displayed back here is the actual HDR environment, which, while being an accurate representation of what's giving you reflections and lighting, comes with its own sort of side effects. An HDR image, it's not tone mapped. It's not the type of image you would see if you were to go to this location and snap a photo. So that's why you see, this weird effect where portions of it are sort of washed out. You can't really, see the ground everywhere. It depends where you are or what you see. But the second issue is that it's kind of a lot of blur to it, which for environment reflections and for your lighting doesn't matter, or at least doesn't matter too much. Where it does matter, however, though, is when you're trying to look at it as a background image. I doubt anyone really wants to see all this sort of pixelation that's there. The image is a fixed size to be loaded for environment reflections and lighting, and it's already pretty big. It's only you're only seeing a very small portion of that image. That's what we talked about previously with cameras and visible background environments. You're only seeing a small portion of it, so basically you've got it zoomed in when you're looking at it here, and the result is the sort of pixelation that occurs. So for those reasons, those are my issues with using the visible visible environments as backgrounds to produce photorealistic images. Now, I will say that many times this may suit you just fine, and I'm not telling you that you can't do it. I'm just sort of giving you my advice in terms of photorealism and how you achieve the best, and it's not to use this combination. What a lot of people also do is say, well, let me go find a nicer looking background, and they find a random image, perhaps of a different location. In fact, most often of a different location, because they don't necessarily know this location, and they throw that back behind the model, and you're going to get odd, less than stellar results most often from that. So let's just look at a few more renders. I basically took this model, I rendered it with the background, the environment background visible there, and positioning is nice, but again, you can't really see the ground. It's washed out. What you can see is kind of blurry because of the pixelation. Then I went and downloaded a picture of the same location. This works okay in this example. I'll show you an example where it's much worse, but there's still some strangeness here. This was a random photo I found online, and I just downloaded it and stuck it behind as a background, and there's some odd things here, like obviously it's a different day. The lighting that's coming from this, that was the lighting that was present the day this photo was taken was certainly not the same lighting that was present the day this HDR image was shot, and it just doesn't match up well. In this case, with this model, I actually got the two to sort of line up pretty well. I'm not sure with a simple model of just some random shapes you'd be able to perceive that the camera which I've set up to view my model and the camera used to take this picture might be set up differently. One could have a 50mm lens, one could have a 35. You don't really know. So the key to getting a good result, you would have noticed this when I opened the model, but here it is rendered, is that you want to have a background image, which is an image of the same location that gives you your environment lighting and reflections, that was taken at the same exact time on the same day as the environment itself was. You know, the effect of everything in this environment, most notably in this case the sun, but you know all the lighting for this environment, it's real. You know, what you see here is real, and because we're using HDR lighting, this same environment shot on the same day gives me a matching set of illumination and reflectivity on my model. So they're sort of matched up very nicely, and it really does make a difference in terms of photorealism. So just to put it in a little more context, we'll look at a more interesting model. So here I have the Aston Martin Vanquish car, and again, it's okay here, but there's those issues where it's washed out, and this is blurry, and it's not quite what I was hoping for. Here I took that other image, I put it behind it, and I might be able to make this look a little better by using a different camera setup here. I just happen to really like the way I had this set up, and when I put an image behind it with a different perspective, with different lighting, different shadows, you can see a different time of the day, it just doesn't work. It looks very out of place, in my opinion. You take a matching set and render them together, and I think you can see the result is a lot more photorealistic. So I would actually advise people who are attempting to do this sort of thing to instead just use something like a gradient background. So here I the same courtyard background or environment scene, but I just set my background to be a gradient, and I actually think that is going to work better in most cases than trying to sort of fudge a random background. So the last thing is how do you get these? SolidWorks doesn't provide you with a set of matching backgrounds and environments. A lot of other rendering applications, dedicated rendering applications, do, and in this case I actually used a set which came from Modo, and Modo has an additional kit you can purchase called the HDRE kit, and that kit comes with a variety of different locations, and each location has obviously the environment for your lighting and your reflections, but also a sampling of different backplate images that work really well with it. So this was just one set, and since I had the kit, I could grab the images from that and just specify those images inside of SolidWorks to get this result out of SolidWorks. So in the end, that may not be the greatest news, because it means you can do this, but you can only do it if you have the right images, and the right images are not at your immediate disposal, but they are out there. You can get them from a variety of locations, and perhaps some users out there who've done this sort of thing can share their experiences with it and where they got images and the like. So that's the first thing I wanted to cover. The next thing, which is related to this, is how you use that background image and don't distort it. So let's actually open up the Vanquish model, and that image only does you the right amount of justice if you go to use it and you do not distort it. And what I mean by that is, this is camera 5, so that's fine. Let me edit this camera. Or actually, let's do this. Let me get out of the camera altogether and just go to front view. So I'm out of my camera, and you'll notice as soon as I went out of my camera, this image stretched from left to right. And the default behavior in a standard SolidWorks viewport when you're not using a camera is that the image, which is behind the model, will constrained to the proportions of your graphics area. This has always worked that way, and it's kind of something that works that way because if you've got maybe a corporate logo or who knows, you know, having it stretched can be a nice feature. But if ultimately you're trying to create a rendering, it's exactly the opposite. It is not a nice feature. So you want to lock the aspect ratios of this image so that it does not get skewed as the size of your window changes. And then ultimately you obviously want to render it without having it skew the aspect ratio of the background. So how do you do that? As with everything we've talked about recently anyway, it all comes down to cameras. So let's add another new camera. And you know, here's my, on the left here is my, let me make this bigger for everyone. Sorry about that. This is my SolidWorks graphics viewport. This is not looking through the camera. This over here is looking through that camera. And in the field of view drop down in the camera property manager, one of the last items is aspect ratio. So it defaults to 11 by 8.5 for a standard print size. But when you have PhotoView when you have a background image specified in your scene, like I do here, one of the options listed here is match background image. So this will update my camera's aspect ratio to be the same aspect ratio of my background image in terms of its width and height. So when I select this, you'll actually see when I select it, this will change slightly. I'll pick match background image, and this just changed ever so slightly, and it changed to match a width-height ratio of what is actually 1024 by 680. That's the actual size of this image here. So that's how you make sure that the image that you're viewing behind your model remains unskewed. Then the last bit is to do with rendering, so I will go ahead and check my PhotoView options. Now by default, out of the box, the options are going to be set to use SolidWorks View, which is all I need to do here. When it says use SolidWorks View and you're looking through a camera, it's actually going to be the camera field of view. It's not going to include this checkerboard area here. So so 1024 by 680, it's a pixel off, which might just be a rounding error. But now your the key is, though, regardless of what you put this at, it's a, so you know, it says 680. Regardless of what you set this to, let's say I needed a smaller image to render more quickly. I could say, you know, I want it to be, you know, 720 wide. 478 is the height, and it won't skew it. So that's all you need to know about setting backgrounds so that they don't get skewed, and why you might like to have a matching background and environment image. The last topic I want to cover on cameras is depth of field. So let me open up another model that is primarily for my typical contrived models to make points. So here's a model of a bunch of spheres and toruses, and they're patterned. Let me get out of my camera. And I've got this one row back in the center that's a different color. That's what I'm going to focus on. The floor here, it's an actual SolidWorks floor. We still have this sort of weird clipping issue that occurs in OpenGL when you look through perspective. That's not model geometry, that's a scene floor. Yeah, so with the camera here, how do I set up depth of field, and how does it work? Let me switch back to my camera view, and I will edit that camera and we'll take a look at it. So when PhotoView is added in, and only when PhotoView is added in, you will have this last little area of the camera property manager called depth of field. You can only see the effects of depth of field if you do a render, so that's why it's only enabled if PhotoView is added in. We try to make it pretty simple here. You basically, once you choose you want depth of field, you can just pick something you want to focus on. I'd actually done that here, but then I I kind of dialed it in a little bit more afterwards. I picked my red face, but I know to sort of illustrate how it works, I wanted it to be right in the dead center of the face, and I didn't make any reference geometry or anything like that. I know that each sphere is exactly 2 inches, and they are exactly 2 inches apart. If you look top down, you can kind of each square in the floor is scaled at 1 inch at the moment. So every 2 inches is the size of the gap as well as the sphere itself. So I need to go 4 inches from this is dead center at the origin, this particular sphere. So 4 inches behind that will put me at the center here, and my camera position is 6.55 inches in the positive Z. So I get my 6.55 to get to this point, and then another 4 to get to there, and that's how I have the 10.55. Again, the only reason I set it up like that was to really explain this point. Ordinarily, you'd be just as well just to say focus by selection, pick something, and be done. But since I want to kind of be clear about what's happening with the rate at which depth of field happens, I wanted to be precise here. So the next thing I have is 1 inch. Now, there is a odd effect that occurs in photography having to do with the rate at which depth of field occurs in front of and behind an area of focus, and it involves a strange concept. For anyone who's a real photographer, you may have heard of the circle of confusion. I think that's what it's called. I'm not a pro photographer myself, so I don't recall if that's accurate or not, but I think it's something called the circle of confusion, and it's pretty complicated in terms of how and why. Essentially, you'll notice that while I move 1 inch in this direction, you can kind of see this plane here, and it's exactly 1 inch, but in the front, it's not. It's not a bug, it's not a mistake, it's physically accurate, and if you want to quote unquote, an inch of area to be in focus, on the nearer side of the camera, it wouldn't quite be that much. But it's just a guide. It's a rough estimate. If you look at the help, we actually let you know that, hey, that's just an estimate. It's to ballpark things to get you the right look. And in the end, I think this implementation is pretty easy. Pick what you want in focus, pick how far you want it to go before things start to get out of focus, and you're done. So, yeah, what does this look like? We can just go ahead and turn on our integrated preview. I think it's running at good quality, so we'll get a reasonable amount of noise and not a lot of anti-aliasing, but I think you'll be able to tell what's in and not in focus. So as this refines, you can hopefully tell that even at this very, very front edge of this first black square here, there's a little tiny bit of loss of focus, maybe even on the edge of the torus. It's a little bit hard to tell, and I would assure you that if you did a full res render, it might even be harder to tell, because instead of looking fuzzy, it would be anti-aliased better and not quite look fuzzy. But as you can see, as I get further away, the depth of field effect becomes larger, and the same happens as you move beyond the and away from the camera. Now, why am I really pointing this out? For those of you who used PhotoWorks in the past and used these very same controls to set up depth of field in PhotoView, I can assure you that in reality it was doing the same thing, but the fall off of the depth of field was never really as accurate and was not necessarily as physically correct as this is. So you kind of hit a point where focus was all of a sudden lost, and there was some fall off of focus, but trust me, I actually rendered this in PhotoWorks, the same model, and you basically have a bunch of blur here and then not a whole lot more here. So it doesn't have that nice real world effect of getting more and more out of focus as you move either closer or further from the focal plane. So, but I mention that because the result is that, for some people if you had previously done a rendering with this model and you had previously been kind of happy with it being more out of focus, closer to the model, you are going to have to come in here probably and adjust this. So let's say, So you had it really exaggerated. I can move these real close together, and now I can get quite a high degree of autofocus, depth of fieldness, and it's just one of those things that people noticed early on with using these controls for PhotoView. Meanwhile, those of you who use PhotoView standalone would have probably gotten used to just picking your focus point and then setting an actual f-stop value. F-stop is the actual name of the control you would use in a digital SLR camera, and can kind of be a little more difficult to understand than just sort of saying, hey, be in focus at this point and start falling out of focus at this point. Anyway, these controls have been there for many years in PhotoWorks, and they simply work now with PhotoView. So that's depth of field for people who hadn't had a chance to use that yet. So with that, I might be done. Let me take a look and see if there was anything else I planned to cover. I don't think I was going to cover anything else because that we've already used up a good amount of time. My video is going to get too big to upload soon, and yeah, I think it's a nice point to say we've covered cameras now at quite a good length. On my radar for things in the future are still things like decal mapping, appearance hierarchy, advanced illumination controls on appearances, animations. Actually, when I was creating this video, or not create this particular video, but working on some of the material, I was quite keen to play with some animation stuff and cameras, and this is a pretty small video. Let me make it bigger, and I'll show this, and if it's something that really gets your interest, I'll be happy to cover this in detail perhaps next time. Just shout out. It's a basic animation where I just move the camera. One neat thing though, I wanted to experiment this. You see a lot of times like with ads and stuff where something will go from in focus to out of focus, and you can actually move and animate the depth of field plane, so it's kind of hard to appreciate as this plays at full frame, at full speed, but the area of focus is changing as this continues to play. So now you can see I pause it and I have a area in focus somewhere around here, and I let it play, and I've just decreased the focal length, and now I've actually moved the focus plane up to the front, and you can see here. So it's kind of a neat effect. We'll play it again in full speed. So perhaps next time, if this is something that really interests people, I can cover it in more detail. I might, because I feel like I've kind of started it and I might want to finish it. But who knows? Maybe if people start chiming in more on the forums about other issues, I'll choose something else. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed all this, and look forward to the next posting. I won't promise anything in terms of time frame, and I will try to get to it as soon as I can. Thanks everyone. Have a good weekend.